Good morning, everybody. Let's see, do I have any housekeeping before we jump into inheritance? No, I don't think I do. I think we're ready to get started. So let me get my screen share sorted out. Okay. So with inheritance, this is something that you probably got a chance to talk about in Mod 1, maybe. Yeah, I'm seeing a few nods. That's great. If you don't feel super confident in describing or implementing inheritance right now, that's okay. I think it's pretty much expected that we're all kind of coming from a different knowledge base and place as far as inheritance is concerned, and this can act as a little bit of a review and hopefully also be good context and start to get you thinking about how inheritance can be useful in your Rails projects. So the first thing that I'd like us to do is breakout rooms. We're going to discuss these questions, and if you don't get to this fourth bullet point here in your breakout room or you don't have an answer for that, that's fine. This is more of like a spicy or an advanced or a challenging question. But these are just to sort of get us started thinking about inheritance and what we already know. So these four questions are: what do you know about inheritance already? What is the super keyword in Ruby? And where have we seen inheritance already in Rails? And then the spicy question would be, if you were to compare like a superclass or the behavior of inheritance to a mixin or a module, what would be some of the advantages and disadvantages of both of those approaches? Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste these into the code help channel and then send you out into your breakout rooms. So give me a second to do that. I think I will actually just go ahead and put these in the Zoom chat. That seems to be working well. Seems to have worked well for the past few days, so I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, and you should be able to join those breakout rooms. I'll see y'all back here in about 10 minutes or so. All right. Hey, everyone. Cool. So I would like to hear from somebody in room 2. So that was Brian, Dane, and Jacob. What do you know about inheritance? Somebody from room 2, please.
Yeah, I can talk to that.
Thanks, Dane.
So yeah, it's kind of an easy way to share functionality among files. You can kind of store like methods and modules, or like methods in like parent classes to provide to child classes. It's kind of like an efficient way to drive your code and or observe SRP.
Great. Yep, I'd agree with all that. Does anybody from a different breakout room have anything to add to this from your discussion about what do you already know about inheritance? I'll open that up for anything else. Sammy.
Yeah, there needs to be an is-a relationship between a parent class and a child class.
There needs to be a what kind of relationship? Sorry.
Is-a.
Is-a.
Like animals, so like platypus is an animal, or mammals, platypus is also a mammal.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you, Sammy. So an example would be a platypus inheriting from animal is a type of animal, I guess we could say. Cool. Gunnar?
Yeah, hi. It carries state as well.
Carries state. Could you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Like attributes and like characteristics can be carried through parent to its child.
I'll just put those two there. I think that communicates what we want. Cool, thank you. Awesome. Could I hear from somebody in room 4 about this second question? What is super in Ruby? So I think in room 4 we had Corinna, Caroline, and Matt. What did y'all talk about here?
Yeah, I can answer this one.
Cool,
It
thanks.
calls a parent method of the same name with the same arguments.
Great. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Did anybody else talk about super in Ruby and maybe why we would want to use it? Anybody have something to add here from any breakout room? Okay. We'll move on to where have we already seen inheritance in Rails? And could I hear from somebody in room 7? So Alex, Kay, Antonio, Marla, what did y'all talk about here?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Go for it, Marla.
I was just gonna say that we've seen it through the controllers and models in Rails. So like application controller, our controllers inherit from application controller, and then our models inherit from, well, I guess application record and then active record. I think I got those names right.
Yeah, that all sounds right. Yeah, so our models are going to inherit from application record, and there's like some 2-step inheritance with both of these. We have application controller for our controllers. Great, thank you. Thank you, Marla. For this last one, I'll just open it up to anybody. And what I'll say here is I have like maybe 1 or 2 things in mind. I'm not looking for a particular answer because, especially because we won't really talk in detail about modules and mixins today. But this was just kind of to get you all thinking about the practicality of this stuff. So I'll open it up for anybody. What advantage might a superclass have over a module? Could you raise your hand if you talked about this and have something to share? We'll do Jacob and then Alex.
I'd be totally off base about this. I think I was reading something about it last night that translates to this. From what I was reading, they were saying that like if you make a module that can be available app-wise to it can make, you can use that method like they make in the module like everywhere, which you might not want to use for security reasons, versus a superclass. Any methods you make or that are in the superclass can only be used by it in the class that you are inheriting from.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that all sounds pretty relevant and accurate. I think maybe what I'll say here for this, how I'll summarize all that, Jacob, is like modules could potentially be accessed more easily. Like a super class method, for example, would be more specific, right?
Yeah.
And I could like maybe elaborate on that a little bit with some technical terminology, but I'm hoping like this discussion will uncover more of what we mean by a super class method being more specific than like something you'd mix in with a module. Okay, cool. Thank you, Jacob. Alex.
Yeah, you can use classes to instantiate objects. So that's something that a module can't do.
Yep, exactly. So we can handle instances with classes, and with a module, we can't have an instance of a module. Right? Use classes to instantiate objects, but modules. I think that makes sense. Cool. Really great points in discussion, it sounds like, everybody. Thank you for all that. Let's see, do I want to say anything here before we move on? No, I think this is a good place to kind of jump into a little bit about inheritance in our slides, and then we'll have an activity here shortly. 1 second. Cool. So inheritance is a way to extract shared behavior and dry up code, just like we said on our previous slide and that you all shared. So thank you for that. That's probably the simplest way to start to describe inheritance. A little bit of terminology to be familiar with when we're talking about this is that the class inheriting the behavior is called the subclass or the child. And the class that the other class inherits from is either referred to as the superclass or the ancestor. These are both synonyms, essentially. And the way that I like to think about inheritance is less like genetics being passed down to children, like, oh, hey, I'm the parent and now I'm giving the child this behavior in this state, and more like a child asking their parent, hey, do you know how to do this? Like a child having to complete something and then saying, I don't have that defined. I don't have instructions for that, but maybe my ancestor or maybe my superclass will know how to do this and how to follow these instructions. And there's this quote from Sandy Metz here. If you are somebody who learns through reading, really likes to like read books to learn new concepts for programming, especially, I definitely recommend Sandy Metz's Practical Object-Oriented Programming in Ruby. I think it was probably mentioned once or twice in Mod 1. It's a really good book, and she has some really good concepts for refactoring and organizing code. And this quote here says, inheritance is at its core a mechanism for automatic message delegation, and it defines a forwarding path for not understood messages. So if we have a dog class that has a speak method called on an instance of that dog class, and that method isn't defined anywhere, the dog instance could look upwards in the inheritance chain and say, hey, animal class, superclass, do you know what speak means? And go from there. So to elaborate on that a little bit, we have this method lookup diagram. What I was just describing is that we might have like this instance of a dog class that goes first to the class dog and looks for the definition of a method. And if it doesn't find one, then it will continue up the method lookup chain and go to the animal class and see, hey, superclass, have you defined this method? And if the superclass has not defined the method, it will continue upwards and look in the object class, the superclass for animal. And it will continue all the way up to basic object, at which point, if it's not defined in basic object, we will get an error. If no ancestors define the method, an error will be returned. And this will just continue all the way up the inheritance method lookup chain, depending upon, how many classes and superclasses and children you have defined. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a POM here and come back at 9:30, and then we'll have quite a bit of time in breakout rooms to try this yourself in plain Ruby before we talk about how we could start using inheritance in Rails. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a POM and come back at 9:30. And so the rest of this will be mostly work time. As people are making their way back from that POM, are there any questions about inheritance so far before we go into a Ruby exercise? Looks like most of us are back, maybe waiting on a few people. Open call for questions about inheritance so far before we go into breakout rooms. While people are turning on their cameras or giving me emoji reactions, getting back from that POM, I'll go ahead and share this slide. If you go to the calendar event, you should be able to get to these slides, and this will be your set of instructions for the breakout rooms. I'm going to put everybody into pairs, so I'll be setting up new breakout rooms for you all to work in groups of 2. And the task here is to basically create some Ruby files and think way back to when you were working in Ruby last mod, how you would basically execute this code just running a Ruby file. And the job here is to create an animal superclass and 2 classes that inherit from that superclass. You should create a method speak that is inherited by the 2 subclasses and a method eat that is inherited by the 2 subclasses. Practice overriding the method speak for one of these subclasses. Create a method on each of the subclasses that is not inherited, And then, like I was saying, write a script to execute each of these. So maybe a runner file, maybe you just put everything into one big file and run that Ruby file in your terminal, whatever works. The idea here is just to kind of have a refresher and get some practice working with inheritance in plain Ruby. Any questions about what I'm asking you all to do, or where to find this set of instructions, anything like that before I open up those rooms? Great. So when I open these up, go ahead and pick a driver and a navigator, please. And then when we do a different exercise later in the class, you can switch. Cool. Those should be open for you now. And we'll take about 30 minutes to do this. You can call me into your room if you need any help.
Yeah.
Is that all right with you? Just making a little instance of it?
Yep. That works good.
Do you agree with the way that I've set it up?
Honestly, I'm trying to remember supers now.
You can pull up a thing. I'm pretty sure that I also have the lesson plan I can pull up. Do I need anything in the ostrich class?
1 second, dude. Let's see.
Something like smell, or grab leaf from tree. How about that?
Yeah.
Grab
Leaf from tree.
and that. And then I guess you could say puts, and then in quotations, say something like got it. I don't know.
Got it.
And then let's go to the hippopotamus class. And let's see, for this one, let's just create a method, swim.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going, y'all?
Good. Oh, did Brett just disappear?
Oh no. Hopefully he comes right back. I don't know.
Okay. Well, navigating. So.
Great. See, he's not like in the main room. Maybe it was just like an internet issue or whatever, but how are things going so far? Everything like going smoothly, making sense?
Yeah, I think so. We're just using puts statements because that feels like it's kind of the easiest thing to do right now. Not sure if we need to be including any more logic than that.
No, I think this, to me, from what I've seen, looks like y'all are on the right track.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope Brett comes back, but otherwise, it looks like y'all got a lot done already. So if anything comes up, let me know.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Sure.
And puts Bob dot is irritated. All right, and let's run that with Ruby Eternal.
Almost there. Okay.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hey, good morning.
Hi, good morning. How's everything going in here?
Great.
Good. We just did the script and it looks like everything's running great.
Awesome. Yep. This looks great. Cool. I have a few more breakout rooms to poke my head into, but awesome. Glad y'all are able to get through all this.
Sweet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Then we can do
Yep. Hey, Jameson.
Hello, how's it going?
capybara dot.
Pretty good. Just trying to make a little script with our Mad Lib methods that we made here.
Sweet. Yeah. I like that way of describing it.
Yeah. Nice. There you go. Capybara.chill.
Great.
Nice.
I love it. And turtle.
Do the same kind of sentence. The turtle squeaks.
When I know we had to look up videos of turtles and tortoises making sounds in order to understand that they would actually also squeak or make noises.
Have y'all ever heard a porcupine make its noises?
Oh,
No, is it
I have to look
terrifying?
this up.
No, that's your next assignment though. Definitely look into what a porcupine sounds like. Very important.
Okay, I want to change the animal now to porcupine, but let's maybe once we get done here.
Yeah, we have a few minutes before I close out these breakout rooms. I'm gonna poke my head in to some other rooms. See y'all in a bit.
Cool, thanks.
See?
And say like puts I am, and then in a string interpolation, I'm just curious if you just put self, what will happen?
Okay.
And I think it's going to show the whole object, so it's not going to look great, but I think this should work, hopefully. I am.
Oh, I didn't put it in the runner file.
Anyway. Yeah. Oh, you missed it. You missed us, Jameson. When Emperor speaks, you listen.
Nice. All right. Cool. Looks like you got some good practice.
Yeah. Is that what making a script? Is that like doing like a runner file sort of thing? Or is there like another way to do that?
Yeah, in this context, I would say just a runner file or something you can run that will execute this code. A script can be any variety of things. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But this meets the expectations. This is great.
So what would you say the other option was? Like what other than a run file in this situation?
Yeah, I've seen people in this class just like have a like inheritance.rb and then maybe like the animal class is defined there. And then outside of that, like in the same file, the dog class is defined. And then at the very end, there's like puts dog.speak. And then there's just the one file and they would run Ruby inheritance.rb, which
okay.
I guess would like also, you could also define that as a script, but everything defined in one file. That part's not super important for this practice, but the runner file is probably the closest to how you would have done it in mod 1, my guess would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they just stack the classes basically.
Yeah. And that's, we're not going to do anything with this. This is just for practice. So whatever works and makes sense to y'all's brains.
Okay.
Sweet.
Okay, see y'all in a bit. I'm gonna poke my head into some other rooms.
Sure, thanks.
3 and 4. Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Hello.
Pretty good. We're on.
Looks like y'all got
Struggled through
something.
the runner.
What was the challenge with, the challenge with the runner file? Was that mostly just getting everything like included and required and executing?
The require part. We tried require with like a dot / and or whatever. That wasn't working, but require relative made everything work. So we're fine with that.
Works for me. Cool. Okay, I'll be closing out these rooms in a few minutes, so I'll see y'all shortly. Just wanted to see how things were going.
Cool, thank you.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks.
Controllably. I don't even know how to spell uncontrollably anymore. Jesus.
Hi, Jameson.
Hi, Jameson.
How's it going, y'all?
Oh, wait. It's going good.
We're just about done.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yarn is what I called it. And then Frank dot licks hand, I think is what I called it.
Just licks. Oh yeah, licks hand.
Hey, y'all.
Hello.
How did the exercise go? Have y'all pretty much finished it, or any questions come up? Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we pretty much finished it, yeah.
Awesome. Great cat tree, by the way, Alex. I'm sure your cats are very, very happy.
Yeah, they like to jump back and forth. They're big,
Nice.
well, at least one of them is, yeah.
Seems like a little bit terrifying, but better their furniture than yours, right?
Yes, it's not terrifying. They
No.
they enjoy it.
That's good.
I encourage them to have fun.
That's
Not
great.
Too much sometimes.
Mine have like shelves they run on, but only like in the middle of the night for whatever reason.
Oh,
It's super fun. Cool. I am going to be closing these rooms out shortly, but I just wanted to check in and see how things were going. So I'll see y'all in a little bit.
yeah, for sure.
All in Georgia.
Hello. Hi. How's it going?
Good. We are finished, actually.
Perfect.
We just created one file with the classes inside of it. So we have class Snow Owl and Clownfish, and then our script is down here.
Great. Yeah, this looks like a really good example. I was actually just about to close out these breakout rooms. Just wanted to make sure everybody got a chance to get through stuff. So I'll see y'all shortly.
Cool. Thanks.
Mhm. All right. Hi, everybody. Let's see. I think we have time to do a little bit of code share before we take a palm. Could I get a volunteer to walk through what you and your pair partner did? And I'm going to ask that you use as much technical terminology as you can to describe how your code is behaving. Yeah, I'll take a brave volunteer to share your implementation of this exercise. I saw lots of really good code in the breakout rooms, so I'm sure we have somebody who can talk about what they did. Corinna?
Yeah, I can share, and Taylor, jump in for any terminology help as I go through this.
Sure.
But all right, so we started off and we have our animal class here, which is our super class or ancestor class. We have our speak and eat method. To start, we have our food. We added this argument that will come in from our child class. Then we have our capybara class, which is inheriting from the animal class here. We initialized the food here, and then also added a frown method to where the capybara is frowning. We also added the attribute reader of food to be able to be called on as a method as well. We have the same setup for our class. I forgot how to say the name of this animal. Look it up. It's a very cute animal. Is inheriting from the animal class. same has the food method. We have a smile method, and our speak method is the one that we have overriding the speak method from our animal class. Then we created our runner file. Oh, I guess one thing I failed to mention, in both of our child classes, we have the require relative here as well from our animal class. And then within our runner file, the require relative for both our child classes, creating a new instance or object of each of the child classes, and then calling on each of the methods here. So the capybara.speak is calling from the parent animal class. And then this one is getting overwritten. So this is the last time we ran it. So it's showing I am animal. And since our child class overwrote the parent class, it is calling on a new speak method. We put the food just to confirm that the food that we did create is pulling in what we the initialized here food, and then seeing as they eat, it decreases it by 1 from our eat method from our parent class. That's all I got.
Awesome. Yeah, very thorough. Thank you for walking through all that. That's super great.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Is it required to have the require relative animal for capybara and quokka, however you say that, at the top of the page? Because if you're associating it with animal, I'm not sure.
Why don't we try commenting that out and then running to see what
Yeah.
happens?
Well, I guess that's fine on just that one. Yeah. So we were getting that error for it, so that's why we ended up adding it. We did not have it at the beginning.
Yep, that's what I would expect.
All right. Thanks.
Cool. So a little bit of a follow-up here. If we go to the, let's see, how do I want to do this? Corinna, could you split animal and capybara like side by side?
Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you. And then, so we do not have a speak method defined on capybara, right? What would happen if you commented out lines 2 through 4 of animal? And before we run this, could you predict what would happen if you ran your animal runner? What message would you get back?
We'll get an error that this method doesn't exist for capybara.
Mm-hmm. And what would be like the order of operate? Like in what order would this happen? On line 7, you're running capybara.speak. What is Ruby doing at that point? And you haven't gotten any of this wrong or anything like that. I'm just like trying to really like zoom in on what you've written here as far as inheritance. So we run capybara.speak on line 7, and then what happens? Where does it go?
So after it runs this,
like where does it look for that speak definition first?
With this, I'm guessing, I think at this point, the capybara method, it'll go through this first and then go to our superclass.
Yeah, exactly. So first it will look at the class of this instance capybara. That would be the capybara class. It looks for a method definition there. It doesn't find one. And then exactly like you said, it looks in the superclass. So then could we open animal back up? And here again, it does not find the method speak defined. And then we don't see this part happening. We don't really have code to look at for this happening, but it'll continue up the ancestor chain in Ruby. So it'll look at like all the way up to basic object and it still won't find it defined. And then let's go ahead and run that and see the error that you predicted, hopefully. Undefined method speak for capybara. Yep. Great, thank you for sharing. I think that covers everything I wanted to see. Anything to add, Corinna or Taylor?
Nope.
Did anybody do something a little bit differently that they'd like to share? Just wanted to open it up in case somebody had a slightly different implementation. And or what questions came up? Go ahead, Brian, if you'd like
Yeah,
to
my
share.
question, well, sure, why not? My question was more about this require relative sort of came in at the back end of mod 1 and sort of still is a confusing thing for me where they're requiring it on top of their classes, their subclasses and stuff. We just had in the runner file to require each of them. And we didn't run into any errors where we needed to require relative on any of the classes themselves. And when she was put in that, I was kind of confused about why, because we have access to it via there. And so that's where I think my confusion started with where require relative was necessary.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm glad you went ahead and shared your screen because I think this is not how I would assume it works. But if you open up your runner file, and this isn't really like requiring files and the file tree and like getting everything available in the scope for Ruby. It's not exactly my wheelhouse, like the low level details of how that works. But what I'm guessing is happening here is by saying require animal RB, require penguin RB, require cheetah RB, it's almost like you are dropping all the code from each of those Ruby files into this file. So it's like you have the class definition, including all of the methods that you have defined on each of those classes. So I would guess that by requiring them at the top of your runner file, you have almost simulated putting all of this stuff in this runner file, like class animal, and then all the methods, and then class penguin, and then all your methods. And that's why that would be my guess as to why it works. And like your alternative would be to maybe like require animal here, and then, or
each of these require relative.
Yeah.
Is that what your was, Corinne? On your runner, did you just have this single require animal or something?
So we had that at one point, but it still wasn't working. The thing that I'm seeing that is different is we didn't create an animal object within our runner file. So if you comment that out and then run it, I think you'll get that same error even with the require animal in there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, since we didn't create that object, we had to have the require relative within each of the child classes.
But having the presence of this object for these to inherit from is necessary within the runner file is kind of where we're.
Can we try an experiment? Brian, could you comment out line 5 and then also lines 9 and 10? Because we are calling that object directly on line 9 and 10, and I'm curious if the error would be exactly the same.
No, not at all.
So yeah, that kind of surprises me that you don't have to require the animal, like animal.rb in any way in penguin and cheetah.rb. I honestly don't have a good answer for why that works. I would expect you to have to require those if you didn't require them here. Oh, but we didn't comment out line 1. So let's also do that. I think this is definitely going to break. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense because
that's the exact error we were getting on initialized constant animal.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So if we had that, okay, I think
at that point you instantiate like penguin and you have all the code in animal.rb available to you because you required it on line 1. So it makes sense that that works. You don't necessarily need an instance for this inheritance to work because it's the classes that inherit from each other. And then the instances that you create out of those classes would have that inherited behavior. But because of like the blueprint that the class creates, not because you have an instance of animal already. The individual instances wouldn't have anything to do with each other in that regard.
But so I have access to the method within animal. Okay, I get it. Okay, thanks.
Cool. If I can clarify any further, anybody can speak.
I think just require relative just sort of as a brain bender for me a little bit.
Honestly, me too. I have done so much work in Rails that usually when I like have to go out and do something in plain Ruby like this, sometimes I actually have to still look up the difference between require and require relative and try a couple of things before all my code is working and running the way I want. But no, this looks great. Thank you for sharing, and I'm glad we got into that.
Nice.
Cool. Let's see, it's 10:03. I think this would be a good time for a POM, right? We haven't taken a POM in a minute. So let's come back at 10:08 and then we'll move on to inheritance and Rails. All right, let's see. Yeah, let's jump into this again real quick. I think we have pretty much everybody back, hopefully. See a lot of videos. Okay, we'll move on. So great job, everybody, with this Ruby exercise. I dropped into the breakout rooms, like I said, and saw some good code and examples and experimentation. So that's awesome. So as we think about how this applies to us now that we're, in Mod 2, we're doing our projects. What does this mean for Rails? Well, like we mentioned earlier, models and controllers inherit from application record and application controller, respectively. So methods defined in application record would be inherited by all models. Methods defined in application controller are inherited by all controllers. And at this point, it's probably a little bit challenging to think of an example of method defined in application controller that would be useful in all of your controllers. I think when we talk about inheritance, it's easy to jump straight to thinking, okay, well, where is the repeated code? What could I dry up? And that in this case, if you're thinking about application controller and the methods we've been using in our controllers like new, create, destroy, it would be easy to think, oh, well, I could dry that up by defining everything in application controller, but that becomes really meta. That's what we would call meta programming, probably to a degree where it's not helpful, because at that point, you have to then pass in what kind of object do you want to instantiate in a new method, for instance, and it's just more abstraction than it's worth. But once we get into Mod 3 and Mod 4, and you're working in bigger applications with different kinds of users, you're looking into sessions and cookies and those types of things. Every controller might need to know about what kind of user is accessing the site, for instance. So that could be something that would be defined in application controller. Wanted to mention that now that this is a common type of inheritance in Rails that you may see, but we don't need to worry just yet about defining anything in application controller. A search by attribute method in application record could be really handy. Maybe every model in your database has a user story or a feature associated with it where you would want to search by an attribute. So maybe you want to search by artist name or search by song title. And a way that you could create that functionality would be to have a search by attribute method in application record that takes an argument of what you're searching by. A current user method defined in application controller is a common use case, like I mentioned, but we don't need to get into that too much right now. What we will do is we'll have time to work on this in Rails, and I'm going to ask everybody to check out the inheritance practice branch of setlist tutorial. And then switch driver navigator. If you were driving last time, then this time you navigate, and try drying up the models in this using inheritance. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. You might have to click around the code a little bit to see what could be dried up and what makes sense to refactor using inheritance and what doesn't. And we'll take 20 or 30 minutes to work on this in our breakout rooms. Does anybody have questions about the exercise? Does anybody not have a setlist tutorial repo that they can work with and get this branch from? Okay. I'm going to open up some breakout rooms. Yeah, and if you need any help or clarification, you can use the ask for help button. I may drop in just to see how things are going. But yes, good luck. Enjoy refactoring these models, specifically the models. And Marla, I know that, oh, Marla left. I'm going to move Marla.
Hey, Jameson, I've got a quick question about
Sure.
the branches in the tutorial.
Mhm.
I've tried to get fetch and I'm still just showing branches that I've either created
Okay.
to like mimic the other ones, but it's already like preloaded with a lot of the stuff that's in there. So how can what do I need to do to get
Can you
Yeah.
remind me, did you fork this repo and then clone
I
that
did.
down?
I did, but then I deleted that and then just straight cloned it. So
Let's
everything.
troubleshoot it. Can you share your screen and we'll figure out what's going on?
Sorry, Dane, did I leave you hanging in the group?
No worries. I thought I left mid-sentence for Jameson. I apologize.
No worries. No.
Yeah, I think Dane, you might have been having the same problem with me yesterday where we didn't have the branch that had like not everything done on it.
Try get branch -A when you get a chance. And that should show you all the branches, remote and local. Cool. So now could you check out, do a get checkout origin/inheritance practice? Would that work? So I think if you stash your changes here on main with a get stash, you should be able to do that. So if you up arrow to that, will it let you?
Sweet. Okay.
Awesome.
So when I was doing git branch, it was only finding my local branches that I had made. So git branch -A lets you pull up all of them. And then I need to go to the origin again to check that branch out from the remote.
Yep, exactly. And if you read this, well, this is a detached head state. I think that this is probably gonna be, it'll be in this state until you commit, if you were to commit. But the first time you check out a branch that is set up on a remote and not on your local, you'll have to include that origin part of the path. So it'll be like origin / whatever it is on the remote. But then that should, like, the expected behavior is that it would set up a local branch that corresponds with that remote branch, so that then you wouldn't have to, like, you could get checkout main and you could get checkout inheritance practice and it would just work, like they would be synced up. Yeah.
Now,
So
now if I do git branch, that'll show up.
mhm.
Okay, awesome.
If you have more problems with this, I'm not sure why you're in a detached head state. I don't think it's super important for today. But if you end up like switching back to main and then you can't get back to inheritance practice or anything like that, we can troubleshoot further. It should work just fine like this.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No problem. And then Dane, I don't think I was saying anything important when you went to your breakout room. So I think y'all are all set to get started on this.
Cool, thanks.
Sure. Hi, Marla.
Hey.
I know you don't have somebody to pair with right now. I wanted to check in with you and see if you've gotten started on this, or if it would be okay if I like moved you into another group.
Either is fine. I'm just kind of started doing it because I figured that would be better than nothing. But I'm fine to move into another group too, whatever's best.
Okay, I think I'll do that. And even if you keep kind of working independently, at least you'll have some people to like discuss this stuff with. Sorry, I kind of left you hanging there. We had a few technical difficulties, but I'll add you to the group if that's all right.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, Jameson.
Hi.
Hi. How are y'all doing?
Good.
We think we're finished.
Yeah. We weren't sure if there was anything else that we should be doing.
Cool.
But basically we saw that these two were the same. And then moved it to application record, since artists and song models are inheriting from application record. And And then we ran the test again, both before and after moving it. Yeah, it seems to be working, so.
Awesome. Yeah, that looks really good. And is a lot more dry. I would maybe also consider like this other method in the song class. Because it looks like it really is doing something very similar to a method of a different name in the artist class.
Oh.
We were just looking at the name of the method, but you're right, that is the same.
And the other thing I would keep in mind when looking at these two methods side by side, like, yeah, the name is different, so that would have some implications on refactoring, but calling the class inside of a class method is like calling self, which is already implied. So on line 9 and line 5, you could say order without any class or without any self or anything, and it would know what you mean. So that might help you out with some of this refactoring.
Oh,
okay.
Awesome.
But yeah, this great work. I'm going to poke my head into some other breakout rooms. You can just call me if anything else comes up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on how that all works out. Hi, Jameson.
Hi, how's it going?
I think
Good.
I think we finished.
Cool. How many methods were you able to abstract into the application record class?
2 of them.
2. Cool.
Yeah, because I think
The order by created, we straight up put in there, and then we, or sorry, the order by created, we created a method to use within the others. And then we pulled out the entire last updated method.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're able to do that. Can you share your screen really quick? I do want to see if this was. It works, like all our tests pass, but what we did was oh yeah, we called order by created in the application record, and then we just called that method in the newest underscore first and the.
Okay.
Can you switch over to song? Yeah, we just like called it in our methods, like from our application record.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Could we look at the song class also?
Oh, sorry, I thought I had that open.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so we called that order by created because those 2 in the song and the artists, they do the same thing, but they're named differently. So instead of like going through our code and like renaming everything, we just called that method in there by naming a new method in our application record.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think what I'm kind of hearing is that if you were to just completely refactor so that both of these methods were named the same thing and were just inherited from application record, then you would have to go through and remove any of the method calls that were by the old name, right? So if you got rid of newest first and made everything order by created, then you would have to go change any instance of like artist.newest first or whatever it was in the rest of the code, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And this allows you to kind of keep those almost aliases or helper methods, but still inherit from the one place where this behavior is defined. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing. I'll close out these breakout rooms pretty soon.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Hi, everybody. I realize I ended those breakout rooms a little bit earlier than I had planned to, but I did drop into a couple of y'all's rooms and see that you had made really, really good progress. So I didn't want anybody to just be sitting there twiddling their thumbs or anything. That being said, if you didn't get all the way through this exercise, that's okay. I think now what we'll probably do is I'll ask somebody to volunteer to walk us through what they did for these refactors, and we can just talk about it as a larger group and address any questions that came up, hopefully. Would anybody like to share their code? Let's go with Taylor.
All right, so let me go ahead and share. All right, so going off the application record is our super class to define new methods and then pass them down to the artist and song controller. we added 3 new methods. So the last updated will essentially, or I guess question, should I stick a pry in so we can kind of watch this in action, or should I kind of just talk through method by method how we looked at it?
Why don't you talk through it first and just kind of
Okay.
give us an insight into your like process, and then maybe we can talk about it more and look in detail if we need to.
Okay, so for last updated, essentially it was the same method requirement for the artist and the song model. So we're able to essentially just write the method once in the superclass, where it just returns the whatever the model object is, updated at attribute, and then the, however you say this method, formatted in the year, month, date format. So that allowed both the artist and song spec test to pass for that instance method. For the following 2, these are the class methods. So we had to define them as self dot method. And then actually this was a question that Corinna and I had as we were kind of closing out what the rationale was for having essentially the same method twice, because it looked like in both scenarios, it's an array of the objects sorted by the most recently created. And we weren't sure if we were missing something or if that was kind of the point of the exercise, but ultimately it's the same method call in both scenarios. We're getting all of the objects, which is an array, and then we can pass in this keyword argument to order them descending by the created attribute. And if we run that, all tests pass.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for kind of walking through all the changes you made there and why they're working and like how inheritance plays into this functionality. I think that was really thorough, and you brought up a great question, which is why do we have these 2 methods, one on artist and one on song, that are accomplishing essentially the same thing, but they're named differently? And my question to y'all is that dry? Like, no, right? That's not very dry. And it would make sense to try to refactor this a little bit so that we're not repeating ourselves, and especially not repeating ourselves with like different naming conventions. So I see we have a couple of hands raised, and I'm wondering if people have suggestions on ways that this could be refactored. Thank you for sharing, Taylor. I think maybe let's leave it up and see what people have to say. So Marla, what's up?
I had more of a question, I guess, and this
Sure.
came up in our group too. In Taylor's in their application record, they have self.newest first, but then in the model, it was just newest first. At least when there was no self, it wasn't a class method, it was an instance method. But I see that both our test passed and his test passed as well. So I guess I'm just wondering like what the logic is there.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not super convinced that this test would pass if it was a instance method. If it was newest first, we wouldn't be able to order on an instance of artist. So maybe that's something that, trying to remember my reasoning here. This seems like it was basically how it would have been, other than the fact that this newest first method is an application record and not, what was it, artist? That's kind of how it would have behaved, right? So why don't we run the test and just kind of test, like, see if that hypothesis is correct. Would this fail? Yeah. And I think like your observation, Marla, is right. We wouldn't be able to use these class methods on instances, or vice versa. We wouldn't be able to use these instance method on classes. So this would have to be like an instance of the artist. And then really the question comes like, what are we ordering if we're only dealing with one instance? I think that is probably something that needed to be changed anyway, outside of like this question of inheritance.
Okay.
But
Cool.
I think if we were to refactor to basically just call on the instance instead of the class, I'm going to venture a guess that this will pass.
Let's try it. We have a little bit of time.
But also, now that I say that, how is Rain going to know about break and kiss? So
Yeah.
we'll find out.
Let's just see what we
Yep.
get. and this might be something to like circle back to. We are having a class on instance and class methods tomorrow. So yeah, undefined method order for an instance of artist. That's kind of what I expected, and the same for song.
Makes sense.
For the time being, Taylor, could you go back to how the code was? And I think y'all are testing my memory. Yeah, I'll wait for you to get that put back how it was, and then we'll continue. Thank you for driving, by the way. This is great. Let's hear from Jacob and Kim, and then Gunnar, I think you had your hand up for a potential idea of how to refactor this, and we can maybe circle back to that. But I want to make sure if Jacob and Kim, you have questions, then we can address those. Jacob, let's hear from you first. Did you have something to add
I think
here?
Kim had her hand up first.
Oh,
she wants
okay.
to go first.
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, one thing that Matt and I did was we just renamed both methods to newest first.
Okay.
And then changed the tests.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess sometimes, for mod 1, one thing that was said a lot was to don't change the test, just because that's kind of the way that they were teaching us. But I actually had something on Taylor's code that I was wondering about.
Taylor, do you
still
mind
have that
sharing
up?
again, and we can, yeah.
Yep, sorry, I didn't.
No, it's all good. One thing
go.
that I thought was interesting was Matt and I actually, if you take out the self in line 9 before order, I think it should still work.
Let's run the test.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
Does anybody have an idea of why that might be the case? Brian?
Well, because it's a class method. So when you're running like order created at, it's happening on the class itself already. So you don't have to put like that. That was one of the ways we refactored too, where we were able to eliminate song and artist because you don't need it. You don't need to specify when you're running it on the class. It's just all like it's the same thing as doing song, which is the same thing as doing song.all.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. What if we had an open question for anybody who wants to just kind of shout out a response? What if we had an instance method? Do we need to use self inside of that method? Not in the method definition, but if we had like, what's a good example? So this wrote song instance method in artist that Taylor is sharing, if we were to put a binding.pry inside of that, what would self be? Marla, you're the one with your hand up. Do you know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I chatted with my mentor about this earlier this week, and she said that it's all implied, that the self is implied in instance or in class methods, so that you don't actually need to use the self at all.
Yep, exactly. Thank you both, and thank you, Taylor, for demonstrating that. If you look at Taylor's pry, we have binding.pry inside of that wrote song method, and then when we call self from inside of it, it returns the instance of the artist that it's being called on, that this method is being called on. So yeah, exactly. Self is always implied inside of the method. Now, when you add self to the method definition, that changes the type of method that you're defining, and we'll get into that in more detail tomorrow. Cool. So let me think about this a little bit. Yes, could I see maybe somebody else's code? Did somebody refactor this a little bit differently? Yeah, take a volunteer. Jacob.
Yeah, so do you know I did it the way that Kim was talking about, where like we just squished everything into one?
Could you share your screen and show us, like, kind of walk through how that's working?
Yeah. So for the artist and the song class, we went ahead and we said, okay, so these both are basically doing the same thing, like these four. So we commented them out and we moved it over to the application record. And one of them had to be the sacrificial lamb. So the sort by recently created, we're like, okay, we can go ahead and just call that newest first because that makes more sense. So we kept that one instead of having both sort by recently created and newest first in the application record. And we went over to the song spec test, and we changed that to newest first from sort by recently created. So now when we run the tests, they are all passing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And you can leave this up on the screen while we talk about it for a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think this is great to demonstrate because part of Kim's original comment / question was, okay, well, if we do it this way, we have to change something in the test. And in mod 1, we really weren't supposed to touch the tests or change anything, right? And what I would say to that is we don't want to be changing tests to just brute force an outcome, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Like we don't want to create a test that is just going to match whatever is already happening in our code, because that defeats the point of tests. And that would just be like a really bad test that is matching the breaking behavior. That's a little bit different than the scenario that we have here, where we've actually changed what we're testing, where we've changed the name of the method that we're testing. And it's no longer called, what was it, sort by recently created. We've now refactored to name it something maybe a little bit more descriptive, or in this case, we have taken 2 methods doing the same thing and grouped them under one name so that we're not repeating ourselves under 2 different methods. So that kind of thing is fine to change in your tests. And if that's still like a little bit confusing, then we can talk about it more. But I would say by this point in mod 2, hopefully like it's starting to sort of make sense why we wouldn't want you to change tests in mod 1 or on certain exercises, because that would just be changing the instructions, right? In this case, we are testing the same thing, but now it's called something different. So in order to test it, we would have to change the name in the test. So that's the first thing I wanted to address. The second thing I have is a question for Jacob. You can go first, but you can also phone a friend, and then anybody can speak up. But since you're sharing, I'll ask you, what might be like a disadvantage of this refactor of changing the name of this method and rolling the behavior into one method with a different name? Do you see any, like, just to the approach, is there anything that maybe would make your life difficult about that?
The biggest thing is that if I'm deciding to dry up the method, like after I've completely made all of my views, my controllers, my spec tests, if after the fact I'm like, you know what, let's put this in application record because I'm drawing it up, it's used somewhere else, then I would just like right here have to go through all of my views, all of my controllers, and change that method name to the new one, which could be an obstinate task.
Yeah, agreed. Exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at. This could be a pretty hefty refactor. And what if you like miss one and one class is still like one line of code still has a class calling the old method name? That can be a pain. So this is, though, what I would ideally want to get to. I think this is the best solution, to just gut the old method name, like the old calls to the old method name, and replace them with this new method, so that we only have the one method that does the one thing, and we know exactly what it's doing, and we don't, and our code is dry, right? This is the outcome I'd like to get to. But thank you, Jacob. If you could stop sharing. I want to pick on Gunnar and Lee a little bit, because they had an example of maybe a temporary workaround, or like another way to think about this refactor. Do y'all have that handy? Could you share it? Maybe some of you did something similar.
Yes, I can. Just 1 second.
Sure. Thanks.
I was going to say, put all the pressure on Lee.
I mean, you can feel free to navigate, Gunnar.
Oh, I will. I will.
Cool. Okay, so how did y'all approach this issue?
Well, in our application record, we saw that, last updated was used. So we just basically copied and pasted that into there. And then to kind of work around because newest firsts and sort by recently created were the exact same methods. We then created a method in our application record called, and they're both class methods, class methods. And we just called it like a new name of like order by created. And we called that method within our methods of song and artist, so that like we don't have to do that where we have to go through like all our views and controllers and change the names.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, I think like this could be an interesting way of going about it, where maybe if you're like, if we take the hypothetical of a really big set list app with tons of views and controllers and all kinds of things, where newest first is created or is called, and then sort by recently created is called on song in a bunch of places, maybe this could be an iterative approach, right? And I think that it just depends upon your team and how much time you have to spend on these refactors and on this tech debt and stuff. And maybe the first pull request looks something like this, where we have an application record method that can be inherited by these other classes and called inside of the existing methods, so that they don't all have to be changed in one go. And I thought that was an interesting approach. Ideally, of course, we want to be as simple and straightforward with our code as possible and not repeat ourselves whenever possible, but this is an interesting demonstration of inheritance. Cool. Does anybody have questions about that before I ask Lee to stop sharing? All right, thank you both. No, but go ahead, Brian.
Almost had it. Just didn't know if, I guess in that particular scenario, which I hadn't ever thought of, but because of the way you're calling the method inside, like you're calling a class method inside of a class method, in this situation, would you need artist and song there?
That's an interesting question.
I think so, right? Because you can't otherwise I wouldn't be able to differentiate song and artists.
Why don't we try taking them out and running the tests? That's awesome. Brian, can you maybe talk a little bit more about why this was an idea you had and why this would be working?
Again, because they're both class methods. So within the method, like it's the implication again, like that it's already running on the class, where, you know, because you're saying self dot in the beginning of the method definition, now it's already knowing that it's going class dot this.
Yeah, and how I might like phrase that or expand on that is to Marla's point earlier, in any type of method, inside of the method, self is implied. It's assumed. Rails, Ruby, you get inside a method and you call self, and that's implied with whatever else you run. And with Active Record, you can run just order by created, or you could run order created at descending, and it will know that you're talking about, hey, run this on self. And to your point, Brian, because we are inside of a class method in both of these, in newest first and sort by recently created, we're inside of a class method. Self in this context is a class. So we can just call this method, which is defined in application record as a class method. So that's why it's working. Is that clear? Can we elaborate any more on that? Does anybody have follow-up questions on why that would be true? Cool. Super interesting stuff. All right, thank you, Lee. That is all I have for class today. We have office hours right after this. So I'll take the next maybe 2 or 3 minutes for any other questions that came up about inheritance, and then we'll take a palm before we roll into office hours. So what outstanding questions do you all have about inheritance, if any? Cool. I think the very last thing I'll say for official class time is that this is nice to know information. It's by no means necessary for your projects if you are not if you're not using application record and inheriting in your actual relational Rails project. That's not a concern. This class is mostly on the calendar to give people an opportunity to like revisit Ruby a little bit and think about how one of those principles of OOP that you learned about in Mod 1 might be applicable in a Rails context. So hopefully it was interesting to everybody, but if it's not, if you don't want to use it on your project or you don't feel confident enough to use it in like a real world setting, that's perfectly okay. This is nice to know information and not critical. Dane.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, kind of in the profession, are modules as common as like just parent-child relations in terms of inheritance?
Interesting. I don't have a very clear-cut answer for you, unfortunately, based on my own experience. My guess would be yes. Inheritance is very central to programming and anything, or to writing code in any object-oriented language, right? That being said, like a lot of my Rails experience was on a team of people that came from like .NET and PHP. So we didn't always do things the Railsy way, and we made heavy use of modules in ways that never really even occurred to me. So I think it does depend upon the team. Kelly, if you're there, I'd love to hear anything that you have to add from your industry experience about like how common is it to work with inheritance. But
yeah, I would say it was fairly common at my last job. Yeah, the one before that, not so much, but this last one, yeah.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I really do think it depends upon your team, like a lot of things. But in Rails, it's a commonly used tool. Rails community is, Rails in general can be very opinionated. So I think it's something that you have a high likelihood of running into if you do end up working in Rails.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Cool. Well, feel free to stick around for office hours. I'm going to go ahead and take a POM and be back at 11. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for being here, everybody. And we'll see you this afternoon for project check-ins, maybe, unless you already did them. Bye.